Witness what it's like to be a non-binary pregnant person and then a parent. Hello and welcome back to I'm the Zaddy. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing some opinions and making some bold statements about healthcare and being non-binary. I realised this episode needed to exist after finding myself repeatedly explaining who I was, who my partner was, and how our family came to exist. That feeling that we didn't exist within the system and that we were just outsiders trying to do something that felt so natural to us became increasingly difficult to ignore. So this episode isn't about pregnancy symptoms, trimester milestones, or preparing for a baby. It's about navigating pregnancy as a non-binary person and what happens when you enter systems that weren't really designed with families like ours in mind. None of the moments I'm going to talk about were huge on their own, but over time they just started to add up. A form here, a comment there, an assumption made before I'd even opened my mouth. The feeling that our family existed outside of the system and that every appointment came with an expectation that I would need to explain myself before accessing the care that I deserve. So this episode isn't about criticising individual healthcare professionals, because many of the people I've met have been kind and supportive and genuinely wanted to provide good care. This is about systems, it's about language, it's about assumptions, and it's about the invisible work that many LGBTQ plus people do simply to exist in spaces that feel like they weren't built for us. Before I became pregnant, I already had assumptions about what my pregnancy care might look like as a non-binary person. And unfortunately, most of these assumptions actually turned out to be correct. And the first thing I noted wasn't something somebody said. It was the paperwork. Before I had even met my midwife, before anyone had even asked me a single question about my pregnancy, I already felt excluded. One of the first examples was Badger Notes. For anyone unfamiliar, Badger Notes is the app the NHS asks you to use to input your details, fill in forms, access appointments, scans and records. On the surface, this might seem insignificant. It's just paperwork, right? But for me, the language tells me who a system expects to use it. And from the beginning, the language felt incredibly gendered. The first sections were completely fine. Date of last period, BMI, medical history, due date. Then came this section about my partner. Not my actual partner, my current partner. I was like, current partner as opposed to what? Future partner, ex-partner. The wording felt so strange and oddly disconnected from the reality of our family and everybody else's family. Then there was a section asking for father's details, not partner's details or spouse's details, not even the second parent details, father's details. And then suddenly a simple form became another reminder that the system had already decided what my family should look like. Our child doesn't have a father. They have a donor and they have two loving parents. Yet the paperwork seemed unable to imagine that as a reality, even a possibility. There's no space to indicate that we had conceived through assisted conception. No space to explain our family structure. And no space to accurately represent my partner. I found this strange because the NHS already know that we've gone through funding with fertility, and they already know and have me recorded as a non-binary person with an unspecified title, unknown. But none of that seemed to matter once I'd entered the pregnancy system. But the information existed. The system already knew, but the form and Badger Notes hadn't caught up. My gender wasn't even asked until much later in the form. And when it was, it meant that the language throughout the app didn't adapt accordingly. So it made no difference. It felt like somebody had tried to make the system inclusive, but stopped halfway through. So ultimately, I refused to fill it in. I was angry, but underneath that anger, I was disappointed. And underneath the disappointment was fear. I remember ranting about that form for hours. My partner had to listen to it. But I cried about it before the appointment, and then I cried about it again afterwards. I know that on the surface it was just a form, it's just a formality, but it wasn't really about the form. It was about what the form represented. If the very first interaction I had with the maternity system couldn't accurately recognise my family, what was the rest of my care going to look like? Would I spend the next 9 months correcting people? Would I have to constantly explain myself? Would my partner constantly have to prove that they were a parent? Would every appointment come with another reminder that we didn't quite fit? And suddenly, I felt vulnerable. Pregnancy already requires you to place a huge amount of trust in healthcare professionals because you're trusting people with your body and your well-being and your baby. And in that moment, I felt like I was stepping into a system that hadn't considered people like me, people like us. I was worried about being mislabeled repeatedly. I was worried about being pushed out of my own experience. And I was worried about the fact that my partner would be pushed out too. And I also worried that if something as simple as a form could get it so wrong, what else would go wrong along the way? My confidence in the system had already taken a beating before I'd even met my midwife. It affected how I went into my first appointment, and instead of feeling excited, I felt guarded. Instead of feeling supported, I felt like I needed to prepare myself for a fight I didn't want to have. And all that happened because of a form. Even now, I look at scans and reports within Badger Notes, very rarely, but I'm still referred to as mother. It would be such a simple change to use the term birth parent or just parent. I know that there are system limitations, but systems are made up of language, and language matters. Those small changes would make a huge difference, and not just for me, but for many other people too. So I contacted Badger Notes directly and explained the situation and asked that they would change it. Now, I don't know for sure whether anything actually happened because of that, but after speaking to my midwife, she mentioned that they had been in touch with her and they were looking into changing it. And I really hope that's true, not just for us, but for all the families that come after us. Because even if you're in a same-sex relationship and identify as a woman, seeing father's details can still be incredibly jarring. Another moment that has stayed with me happened during the appointment itself with the midwife. Because we use a donor to conceive, we actually know a huge amount about them. We know their medical history, their family's medical history, even their blood group. And in many ways, we probably know more about them than a lot of people know about their spouse or biological second parent. But we came prepared. My partner came prepared because we'd been told repeatedly that family medical history matters, that genetic history matters, that healthcare professionals need that level of detail for the full picture, for the genetics of the child. So my partner was prepared with all of those details. But when we got to that section of the appointment, there seemed to be very little interest in it. It felt like the moment the word donor was mentioned, the details stopped being relevant. And that was a massive surprise to both of us. Because surely the route through which somebody contributes genetic material doesn't make the information less important. The information existed and it was available. And it is relevant to our child. But because it didn't fit the narrative the system was expecting, it just seemed to be dismissed. And we left feeling genuinely confused. Had we misunderstood? Did the information genuinely not matter? Or did the system just not know what to do with it? Like I said, within badger notes, there was no option to indicate donor conception. So, no acknowledgement that assisted conception had taken place or that we'd been through fertility. It felt like we were being pushed into a box that we didn't fit in. And once again, it felt like we didn't fit what the system thought a family should be. One of the hardest parts of pregnancy as a non-binary person hasn't been a single dramatic incident. It's been the repetition, being called mum, being grouped in with the mums, being called a lady, and being referred to as a woman before anyone has even asked me who I am. These moments happen all the time, and every single one of them is based on an assumption. An assumption that because I'm pregnant, I must therefore be a woman, and therefore should be a mother, and therefore should fit neatly into a category that is completely wrong for me. Being called a lady has probably been one of the things I've struggled with the most throughout pregnancy. And sometimes it hasn't even been directly said at me. One example that really has stayed with me was when we had to attend the maternity day unit because I hadn't felt the baby move for a while, and naturally we were worried. So we visited to get them checked out. We were already anxious, and I was already feeling vulnerable and already running through every possible scenario about whether they're okay or not. But whilst we were waiting to be seen, I overheard a member of staff referring to us as the two ladies out there waiting. And it wasn't to my face, and it wasn't malicious, but it still hit me, and I remember saying out loud to my partner, "Not a lady," because even though the comment wasn't directed at me, it still was about me, and it was another moment where somebody had made an assumption about who I was based entirely on how they perceived me. Another example is where we've been waiting for an appointment and you get called in. And often they see us and they go, "Come in, ladies." And every time it happens, I have the same thought. My notes say I'm non-binary. My record says I'm non-binary. And I have explained that I am non-binary. So why am I still being welcomed as a lady? And that's where another layer of worry creeps in. Because if something is that clearly reported on my file but is being missed, what else isn't being read? The issue isn't really the word itself, lady. The issue is what it tells me. It tells me that assumptions are being made before anyone has even looked at the information that's already right in front of them. And when you're relying on a healthcare system during one of the most vulnerable periods of your life, that's not a particularly reassuring feeling. People often hear conversations like this that I'm having and think it's only a word. But words aren't just words. Words tell us how people see us. Being called a lady isn't simply a label I dislike. It's a reminder that somebody has looked at me and decided who I am without even asking. And because pregnancy already places such a huge focus on your body, those moments can feel so intense. It feels so similar to hearing my dead name. That uncomfortable, twisting, stomach churning feeling. That moment where everything feels wrong. And not because the person intended harm, but because they're not truly seeing me. And perhaps the hardest part is deciding what to do with that feeling. Do I correct them? Do I explain myself again? Do I have the energy to do that? Or do I just let it go? Because none of these individual moments are catastrophic on their own, but they accumulate, and eventually you realize you're making daily calculations about your energy. I have corrected people over the years, and whenever I have, people have genuinely been respectful. They've apologized, corrected themselves, and we've all moved on. The problem isn't necessarily what happens after I correct someone. The problem is how often I have to do it. And that's where the emotional labor comes in. One thing I don't think people realize is how much additional emotional labour can come with being a non-binary pregnant person. Every appointment carries questions. How much explaining am I going to have to do today? Will I need to explain my partner, our donor, why certain language doesn't fit? And perhaps the biggest question, will this appointment feel safe enough for me to do that? Because correcting someone isn't always simple. Sometimes you're tired, sometimes you're vulnerable. And I am pregnant, and it's hard, Sometimes you're discussing your health and the health of your baby. And the last thing you want to do is become an educator in that situation. But sometimes that's exactly what happens. And that is tiring. And these assumptions don't stop within healthcare. They appear everywhere. Workplace policies, government forms, benefit systems, maternity leave, shared parental leave, just out in public spaces. Again and again and again, systems seem to assume one specific family structure. One mother, one father, and one clearly defined role for each person. But families are far more diverse than that. And sorting out maternity leave has been particularly interesting. Our plan has always been to use shared parental leave because for us it makes complete sense. But the number of times we've had to explain it is mind-boggling. People often assume that because I'm carrying the baby, I must be automatically the parent taking most of the leave. But when we explain our plans, people seem genuinely shocked and some weirdly impressed. But most admit they've never really considered another option. But the framework exists and the option is there. But many people have not encountered it in practice. So once again, we found ourselves having to educate and clarify it all. And whilst we're happy to do that, again, it is tiring when you're also carrying the weight of everything else. Thankfully, there has also been moments that have reminded me and us what good care really looks like. People like the midwife who asked questions rather than making assumptions, the healthcare professional that actually listened, the person who challenged my name issues on the record, the person who corrected themselves and just simply moved on. The moments where my partner was treated as an equal parent, and the moments where somebody saw our family as completely normal. Those interactions have mattered enormously throughout this process, not because they were extraordinary, but because they shouldn't be. They should be standard. And that's what I really want healthcare providers to understand. Language matters and assumptions matter. And I think that you need to understand that every time someone has to explain themselves, it takes energy. And that inclusion isn't about being politically correct. For me, it's about providing care that allows people to feel seen. You don't need to know everything. You don't even have to get it right the first time. But ask rather than assume, and use the word partner until somebody tells you otherwise, and use the word parent until somebody tells you otherwise. If someone corrects you, then thank them and move on. And remember that families don't all look the same. I don't expect everyone to know exactly the right thing to say, but what I would really ask for is curiosity instead of assumptions, questions instead of labels, and recognition that families like mine exist. Because we do. And we deserve the same healthcare, the same safety during healthcare. Looking back, pregnancy has taught me many things. But one of the biggest lessons has been how much our systems still have to learn. The healthcare system needs updating. Their language needs updating. And people need support and education in it. We are not the first family to do this, and we will certainly not be the last. We have received some fantastic care over this period of time, But too often, those positive experiences have been overshadowed by the assumptions that didn't need to happen. I would always rather answer a question than have somebody make a decision about who I am before they've even met me. And ultimately, that's what this episode comes down to. We are not unusual. We are not an exception. We're simply just another family. A good healthcare isn't about treating everybody exactly the same. It's about making sure everyone can see themselves reflected in the care that they're receiving. I'm going to leave this episode there for now. Perhaps I'll come back to this after the birth and do a little update on how things have unfolded. If you've experienced something similar, or if you have questions about my experience, I would genuinely love to hear from you. You can email me at getintouch@imthezaddy.com or send me a DM on Instagram at imthezaddy.pod. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Speak to you next time. Peace.